Once upon a time, there was a potter who spent 20 years of her life trying to create the perfect bowl. Every piece that came from her hands was examined with critical eyes, every curve measured, every thickness calibrated. And every piece, without exception, ended up destroyed by her own hands. Because there was always something that wasn't right. A slight asymmetry. An uneven tone in the glaze. A texture that was not exactly as she had imagined it. Until one day, tired and with trembling hands, she dropped her most polished work. The bowl shattered on the floor of her workshop. And in that moment of accidental destruction, she discovered something that would change not only her art, but her way of living. What you are about to hear is a story that has changed the perspective of thousands of people regarding their own imperfect lives. Today we are going to explore one of the most liberating teachings of the Japanese Zen tradition. A philosophy that does not ask you to fix yourself, that does not demand that you improve, that does not promise you a perfect version of yourself. I am going to talk to you about WABI-SABI. And if you have never heard these words before, get ready. Because this teaching has the power to lift a weight you may have been carrying your entire life without knowing you could let it go. Perhaps you also feel that something in you should be different. Not necessarily broken, just different, better, more complete, more correct. You are not alone in that. And this story will show you why that feeling exists, and more importantly, how you can begin to live without it. Unlike her grandmother, who worked with relaxed hands and a constant smile, Yuki lived in permanent tension. Every bowl, every vessel, every plate she created went through merciless scrutiny. Her own eyes were her harshest judge. "This isn't right," she would tell herself as she turned a freshly fired cup. "The rim is uneven. This can't be sold like this." And the cup would go onto the pile of rejected pieces. A pile that grew month after month, year after year. The villagers didn't understand. They would come to her workshop and look at those imperfect pieces with admiration. "Can I buy this one?" they would ask, pointing to a bowl from the rejection pile. "No," Yuki would reply firmly. "That piece has flaws. It's not up to standard." "But it's beautiful," they insisted. Yuki shook her head. For her, beauty existed only in perfection. And perfection was something that always seemed to be one step beyond what her hands could create. Over time, this constant pursuit began to affect her in ways she herself did not notice. She would wake up in the middle of the night thinking about pieces she had destroyed years earlier. "Maybe I could have saved it," she thought. "Maybe with a little more work." During the day, her hands trembled slightly as she worked the clay. Not from excitement but from fear. Fear of making a mistake. Fear of creating something imperfect. Fear of disappointing the internal image she had of what her work should be. The people in the village began to notice that Yuki no longer smiled. That she walked with tense shoulders. That her eyes, once bright, now showed only exhaustion. "Are you okay?" her neighbor asked her. "I'm fine," Yuki replied. "Just busy." But she wasn't busy. She was trapped. Trapped in a demand no one had imposed on her except herself. Trapped in the idea that her worth depended on creating something perfect. And with each passing day without achieving it, she felt emptier. Until that winter day arrived that would change everything. It was a cold morning in January. Yuki had spent 3 weeks working on what she considered her masterpiece. A ceremonial tea bowl. She had measured every proportion, controlled the kiln temperature with millimetric precision, applied the glaze in perfectly even layers. When she finally removed it from the kiln and saw it finished, something in her chest expanded. For the first time in years she felt that maybe, just maybe, she had reached the perfection she had been searching for. She placed it on her work table to examine it in natural light. She turned the bowl slowly. Every angle seemed right. Every curve flowed with harmony. There were no visible cracks, no irregularities in the color. "This is the one I was waiting for," she whispered to herself. But then, as she lifted it to look at it more closely, her hands, exhausted from years of tension, betrayed her grip. The bowl slipped from her fingers. Everything happened in slow motion. She saw the bowl fall, saw it spin in the air, saw it crash against the wooden floor of her workshop. The sound of the impact echoed in the silence. The bowl did not shatter completely. It broke into 3 large pieces and several small fragments. Yuki stood frozen. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, staring at the pieces on the floor, feeling how something inside her also broke. She slowly knelt down and picked up the fragments with trembling hands. She carried them to her table and, without quite knowing why, began to arrange them as if they were pieces of a puzzle. And then she saw something she had never seen before. It was a cold morning in January. Yuki had spent 3 weeks working on what she considered her masterpiece, a ceremonial tea bowl. She had measured every proportion, controlled the kiln temperature with millimetric precision, applied the glaze in perfectly even layers. When she finally removed it from the kiln and saw it finished, something in her chest expanded. For the first time in years, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she had reached the perfection she had been searching for. She placed it on her work table to examine it in natural light. She turned the bowl slowly. Every angle seemed right. Every curve flowed with harmony. There were no visible cracks, no irregularities in the color. "This is the one I was waiting for," she whispered to herself. But then, as she lifted it to look at it more closely, her hands, exhausted from years of tension, betrayed her grip. The bowl slipped from her fingers. Everything happened in slow motion. She saw the bowl fall, saw it spin in the air, saw it crash against the wooden floor of her workshop. The sound of the impact echoed in the silence. The bowl did not shatter completely. It broke into 3 large pieces and several small fragments. Yuki stood frozen. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, staring at the pieces on the floor, feeling how something inside her also broke. She slowly knelt down and picked up the fragments with trembling hands. She carried them to her table and, without quite knowing why, began to arrange them as if they were pieces of a puzzle. And then she saw something she had never seen before. The cracks of the broken bowl formed unexpected patterns, irregular lines that crossed the surface like rivers on a map. And in those lines, Yuki saw something strange. She saw history. She saw the exact moment of impact. She saw the weight of the fall. She saw the fragility of the material, and somehow she also saw the fragility of her own life. Without thinking too much, she did something she had never done before. Instead of throwing the pieces away, she decided to repair them. But not in the traditional way, where she would try to hide the cracks. No. Something in her wanted the opposite. She wanted to highlight the fractures, make them visible, turn them into part of the piece instead of hiding them like a shameful secret. She took gold powder and mixed it with resin. With patience, she began to join the fragments, filling each crack with this golden mixture. The process took hours. Her hands no longer trembled. For the first time in years, she worked without fear. When she finished, she sat in front of the repaired bowl and observed it in the afternoon light. The bowl was no longer perfect. Golden lines crossed its surface like luminous scars. Each crack told the story of its fall. And yet, there was something in that piece that had never existed in any of her perfect creations. There was life. There was truth. There was beauty in the honesty of showing that something had been broken and rebuilt. For the first time in 20 years, Yuki felt something like peace. The next morning, Yuki placed the repaired bowl at the entrance of her workshop. She didn't hide it. She didn't store it away in a corner. She put it in the most visible place where everyone could see it. The first customers who came in stopped in front of the bowl. They observed it in silence. Yuki expected them to reject it, to say it was broken, that it was no longer useful. But what she heard was different. "It's beautiful," said an elderly woman. "I can see its history." "I've never seen anything like this," another customer commented. "It's as if the bowl has lived through something and is sharing it." "Is it for sale?" asked a merchant from the city. Yuki shook her head. Not because the piece wasn't worthy, but because she needed to keep it. She needed to remember what she had learned. That night, as she closed her workshop, Yuki sat in front of the repaired bowl and remembered something her grandmother had told her many years earlier, when she was just a child. "Yuki," the old woman had said as they worked the clay together, "perfection does not exist in nature. Not in trees, not in mountains, not in water. Everything that is alive has irregularities, asymmetries, marks of time. And yet, is there anything more beautiful than an ancient forest or a river that has carved its path through the rocks?" At the time, Yuki had not understood. She thought her grandmother was only trying to comfort her after she had ruined a piece. But now, looking at the bowl with its golden cracks, she understood. Her grandmother had been speaking to her about wabi-sabi. Wabi-sabi. Two words that together name something difficult to translate. Wabi speaks of the beauty of the simple, the austere, that which needs no adornment to exist. Sabi speaks of the beauty brought by time, where, the patina of lived experience. Together, these words form a philosophy that sees imperfection not as a flaw, but as an inherent characteristic of everything that exists. A way of seeing life that accepts transience, incompleteness, and irregularity as a natural part of existence. Yuki began to explore this philosophy more deeply. She visited ancient temples where Zen masters explained that wabi-sabi is not just a way of making art, it is a way of living. "Look at this temple," an elderly monk said to her, pointing to wooden beams worn by centuries. "Do you see how the wood has darkened over time? Do you see the cracks, the marks, the irregularities? We could replace them with new wood, polished, perfect. But then we would lose the history. We would lose the truth that this temple has been here, supporting generations, withstanding storms, sheltering prayers." The monk paused. "The same is true for people. You have cracks, Yuki. We all do. The question is not how to hide them, but whether you can learn to see them as part of your beauty, not in spite of them." Those words resonated in Yuki in a way she couldn't explain. For 20 years she had lived at war with herself, trying to eliminate every imperfection, every mistake, every sign that she was human and therefore fallible. Before continuing with what Yuki discovered afterward, I want to ask you for something. If this story is touching something in you, if you recognize that voice that tells you that you should be different, better, more complete, subscribe to this channel. Here we share ancient teachings that help you live with less weight, with more honesty, with more peace. Click the subscribe button and activate the bell. Every week we publish content that can change your relationship with yourself. Now let's return to Yuki, because what comes next is the most important part. Yuki returned to her workshop with a clear decision. She would no longer try to create perfect pieces. Instead, she would begin to create honest ones. She began to work in a completely different way. She no longer measured every millimeter. She no longer destroyed pieces because of small irregularities. Instead, she allowed the clay to express itself, to take slightly asymmetrical forms, to show the marks of her fingers. She stopped controlling the kiln temperature so rigidly, allowing the fire to create unique, unrepeatable patterns in the glazes. Some pieces emerged with unexpected color gradations. Others showed small bubbles or textures that she would previously have considered defects. And something extraordinary began to happen. Her pieces began to sell more than ever. People traveled from other cities just to buy from her workshop. But more important than that, people bought them not in spite of the imperfections, but precisely because of them. Each piece is unique, customers said. I can feel that there is something alive in this. Something real. They were right. There was something different about those pieces. They were not mass-produced products trying to look identical. They were individual creations, each with its own personality, its own history, its own way of existing in the world. Yuki also noticed a change in herself. Her hands no longer trembled when she worked. She slept better. She smiled more. The constant tension in her shoulders began to fade. It wasn't that everything in her life was now easy or perfect. There were still difficult days. She still made mistakes. She continued creating pieces that did not turn out as she expected. But she no longer saw them as failures. She saw them as part of the process, as part of being human, as part of creating something with her hands and her heart instead of only with her mind. One day, a young woman entered Yuki's workshop. She carried with her an old vessel she had inherited from her mother. The vessel had a deep crack running through it from top to bottom. "Can you repair it?" the young woman asked with moist eyes. "I know it's broken, but it was my mother's. I can't just throw it away." Yuki took the vessel carefully and examined it. The crack was deep, almost splitting the piece in two. But she also saw something else in that fracture. She saw love. She saw memory. She saw years of being on a family table, holding flowers, being part of a life. "I can not only repair it," Yuki said with a smile. "I'm going to make this crack become the most beautiful part of the piece." Over the following days, Yuki applied the technique of KINTSUGI, the art of repairing with gold that she had learned when she repaired her own bowl. She filled the crack with resin mixed with gold powder, highlighting the fracture instead of hiding it. When the young woman returned for the vessel, she was left speechless. The golden crack shone under the light, transforming what had once been a defect into a unique and beautiful feature. "It's more beautiful now than when it was intact," the young woman whispered, with tears running down her cheeks. "Now I can see its history. I can see that it survived. I can see that even broken, it is still valuable." Yuki nodded. "Just like you. Just like me. Just like everyone." The years passed. Yuki grew old. Her hands, which once trembled from tension, now trembled slightly from age. Her back curved a little more each year. Wrinkles appeared on her face, marks of time that she once would have tried to hide. But now, when she looked in the mirror, she did not see flaws. She saw a life lived. She saw experience. She saw the golden cracks of her own existence. One day, while working in her workshop, a young woman arrived who reminded her of herself 20 years earlier. The girl brought several ceramic pieces she had made. "Master Yuki," the young woman said with a trembling voice, "could you look at my work and tell me what I'm doing wrong? I've tried for years to create perfect pieces, but there is always something that isn't right. There is always some defect." Yuki looked at the pieces. They were technically flawless. Every curve was precise. Every surface was uniform. But something was missing. There was no soul. There was no trace of the hands that had created them. "What do you see when you look at these pieces?" Yuki asked. "I see all the mistakes," the young woman replied immediately. "Here the glaze isn't completely even. Here there's a small bubble. Here." "Stop," Yuki interrupted gently. "Now I want you to do something different. I want you to look at this piece I just finished." Yuki showed her a bowl that was clearly asymmetrical. One side was slightly higher than the other. The glaze had color gradations, darker in some places, lighter in others. "What do you see?" Yuki asked. The young woman hesitated. I see irregularities." And, Yuki insisted, and I also see something beautiful. I see that every angle looks different. I see that it has movement life. I see that. You see what it is, Yuki finished. Not what it should be. What it is. Yuki took the young woman to the back of her workshop, where she still kept that first bowl repaired with gold, the one that had fallen from her hands so many years ago. This bowl taught me something that changed my life, Yuki said. It taught me that beauty is not in the absence of cracks, but in the honesty of showing them. That value is not in being perfect, but in being real. She held the bowl in her aged hands. For 20 years I tried to create the perfect bowl, and all I achieved was to live in constant tension, destroy hundreds of beautiful pieces, and distance myself from the true beauty of my art. But then this bowl broke, and in that moment of destruction, I found something more valuable than perfection. I found truth, and the truth is that nothing is finished. Nothing is perfect. Nothing remains the same forever. And that is not a problem. That is life. The young woman listened with eyes full of tears. The cracks in this bowl tell a story, Yuki continued. They tell the story of a woman who tried to be perfect and failed. But they also tell the story of how that woman learned to let go, to allow, to live without being in constant war with herself. Yuki handed the bowl to the young woman. I want you to keep it. And every time you look at it, I want you to remember something. Your imperfections are not mistakes. They are proof that you are alive, that you have tried things, that you have fallen and gotten back up, that you are human. You do not need to be perfect. You only need to be honest, with your art, with your life, with yourself. Yuki lived to be 90 years old. When she died, she left behind a workshop full of beautifully imperfect pieces, each one unique, each one with its own story, each one a testament that beauty is not in perfection, but in authenticity. At her funeral, hundreds of people brought the pieces they had bought over the years, bowls with small asymmetries, vessels with unexpected color gradations, plates with irregular textures, and many, many pieces repaired with gold, proudly showing their cracks. She taught us to see differently, said one of her oldest customers. She taught us that we don't have to hide our fractures, that we can turn them into part of our beauty. And that is the teaching of WABI-SABI. It is not a philosophy that asks you to fix yourself. It does not demand that you improve. It does not promise you a perfect version of yourself. It offers you something deeper and more liberating. Permission to be human. Permission to have cracks. Permission to be incomplete. Permission to exist just as you are with all your imperfections and still recognize your own beauty. Now I want to ask you something directly. How many years have you spent trying to be perfect? How many times have you looked in the mirror and only seen what is missing, what is wrong, what should be different? How many parts of yourself have you hidden because they didn't fit the image of how you should be? WABI-SABI invites you to do something radical, to stop fighting against your own nature, not to give up, not to stagnate, but to live from a place of honesty instead of constant self-demand. Your doubts are not failures. Your exhaustion is not weakness. Your scars are not sources of shame. They are the golden cracks of your existence. They are proof that you have lived, that you have tried, that you have been brave enough to be in the world despite your fragility. You do not need to fix yourself before allowing yourself to be at peace. Peace is not a prize at the end of the road of perfection. Peace appears when you stop demanding that the road be perfect. Perhaps today you won't feel immediate relief. Perhaps tomorrow the doubts will return. Perhaps the self-demand will come back. That, too, is part of the process. WABI-SABI does not promise that everything will be easy right away. It only reminds you that you do not have to be finished to have value. Life continues imperfect, incomplete, and yet deeply alive. If this story touched something in you, if something Yuki discovered is something you also need to discover, I invite you to subscribe to Zen Wisdom. Each week we share teachings that help you live with less weight and more truth. Give this video a like if it resonated with you. Share it with someone who needs to hear that they don't have to be perfect to be valuable. And leave me a comment. What is the golden crack in your life? What imperfection are you learning to accept? See you in the next video. Until then, remember, your cracks do not make you less beautiful. They make you real. And what is real will always be more valuable than what is perfect. See you soon.